Hey there, thanks for coming over. And we have Cameron here, and he's one of the very good well-being astrologers that I found out. I don't know if he calls himself that, but he's an astrologer who has his background in psychology and
health and sports science.
yeah. So that is the major motivation for me to ask Cameron Allen to come over here and talk about this stuff that I call it as well-being astrology. And I already started a playlist in this, and I'm doing one of the series on Vastu with Indian astrologer and one of my good friends, Vanita Lenka. So I think that this video, where in this video we are going to talk about some of the patterns of well-being and how we associate well-being with astrology. So it is basically a path to finding well-being through astrology, and I was particularly impressed by Cameron's presentation in the EA Zoom meetings video that he did. And welcome, Cameron. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, okay. So how do you define well-being through astrology? So you have a specific background from health and sports, and you also have a good psychological background, and I think you bring something unique to the table when it comes to astrology. So I thought it'll be nice to hear and start with how do you kind of how do we achieve well-being through astrology in a very layman perspective? How do you explain that to a layman?
Yeah, so a lot of times I just break things down to the essence, right? So even just a very simple example, you could take the idea of Mercury, which could correspond to the nervous system, right? Which is about information, right? So I ask people when you are eating your food, when you eat food, there's information in the food, right? It's are you thinking too much? Because that's information, right? I have information up here, and you're eating food, and that's information. And I ask them, how much of the information can you really digest? And so I put those two things together, information that people are they usually associate that with their brain, up here their brain, but they don't always associate it with their stomach or with food that they eat. So it's just making it very simple in that way. It's if I'm digesting information up here, then I'm putting this food in my mouth, and I might not be necessarily digesting that information for nourishment. And even corresponding those two things to Gemini and Virgo. Up here you have the mercurial nature of information up here, but then down here you got the mercurial nature of information that's in the stomach, or more in the the intestines, or just the whole coordination of the digestive tract as a whole. And people can really understand that. It makes it much simpler, and it's just oh yeah, why did I never think of that? A lot of things like that is how I get people to understand it on a very, very simple level. And it also gets them to reflect on things, because I'll ask them yeah, if we don't even think of stuff like that, what else don't we think about, and kind of joke about it. But it does get people to be much more reflective and take in and allow their self to feel what is really going on,
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting that you started with Mercury and nervous system. So essentially, as astrologers, we have to deal with the planetary dignities and the aspects that planets form with other planets. So let's say, personally, I've seen, I know a person who is actually struggling through nervous-related neuro problems or nerve-related issues, which is directly linked to the nervous system of the body, and that particular person has some kind of depreciation or some problem in the nerve that is connecting to the brain, and it passes through the back of the neck, so it comes through spinal cord and it takes this route. So there is some kind of a block here, and there is a problem in the brain is not able to send the the communication or sensory stuff to the nervous system, and the communication is not proper, and that is basically due to the affliction of Mercury. And I've seen the chart, and the timing period and stuff kind of suggests that particular thing. So how do you kind of see, do you see a particular health issue, or not just health issue, but some kind of disruption in lifestyle through a planetary position? And do you want people before, not one, but just give like psychological hint or something like that, that this person is going to have something like this? Because when Jupiter is afflicted or something like that, Jupiter directly rules the gland of pancreas. So, and pancreas, actually, the dysfunction of pancreas or malfunction of pancreas leads to diabetic condition. So, how do you see all these things, like, and how do you advise people from an astrological point of view with your background in health sciences?
Right. So even like with my health and sports science, like honestly, like I took my health and sports science and I used, like, I'm an herbalist too as well.
Okay.
So like that is the health and sports science. It's like with the herbalism and astrology starting to come into that much more, but the psychology is the astrology for me more so than, you know, the health and sports science part of it. But what I do is honestly, I do tongue, I check the tongue, I do pulse, I've begun doing like iridology as well. So by the time that I do all that, I pretty much have all the information I need. And when I look at the chart, it pretty much illuminates what kind of psychological processes that this person has that's creating all of these things within their body. So I don't even necessarily look towards the chart for now, at least for like medical holistic evaluation tool. I look at it as just like, what is the energy that is here? So like, let's say Jupiter is in Leo, then that might be like heat and excitation, or like it could be like something like inflammation because it's the heat.
Inflammation.
Right, exactly. And then if it's let's say if it's Mercury, then maybe it's dry and it needs to be moistened. So I look more towards the planets as like energetic forces, like the energetic force of the issue. So the issue might be too damp, it might be too hot, it might be too wet, you know, stuff like that. And then when it comes to like the psychology, usually sometimes it's hard for me to like separate the difference between the two, because I'm like, oh no, that is that, you know, on some level. It's like, oh, that person thinks too much and is on the go all the time. I'm like, yeah, that issue in the back of their neck is that very thing. It's the same thing to me a lot of times, which I'm learning to differentiate it more. But I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how I perceive it.
Yeah, I think I can enlighten you more on this. Like, it is the person had trouble in terms of even simple basic things, like if you want to take your hand here and touch this, it won't happen, and your hand will move somewhere else. Okay, so this is the common problem that this person is facing. And if you want to step your foot somewhere straight, and it won't happen that way, and it just goes somewhere zigzag, like right or left. So that is the problem that this person is facing, and this is a classic problem of the brain's message not reaching the other parts of the body, which actually need to do the action part. So
right.
Yeah.
So for me, I mean, with something like that, it feels, I would look to Uranus for that right there, personally.
Okay, good.
Because it's like a very, like, the energy somewhere is stuck. So it's like whenever I see like energy that's just purely stuck, and when things are stuck, to me, it's like it'll be stuck, and then go over there. It'll be stuck, go over there. And because it's like you're trying to go over here, but it's like it's the energy stuck, and it's just like taking it somewhere else, which is very like erratic. So like for me, just like feeling into what you just said, I would look towards Uranus in that case.
Great, but as it is, I have a predominantly Vedic astrology background, and I don't work with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, but still, I'm kind of still exploring the nature of those planets and how we work from an astrological point of view. But I think it will be great if you can enlighten much more about about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, specifically with regards to this particular group of stuff that we are talking about, like patterns of well-being and disruption in well-being in life and a person's lifestyle. So now we spoke about Uranus, like you said, yeah, I can easily relate to Uranus, but I could do it only after you say, because I don't work with the Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. But still, the moment you said that the energy is kind of stuck at one place, even I kind of realized that it is Uranus. So, what are some other issues that come like that kind of manifest due to particular placement of Uranus, which disrupts our basic course of life and lifestyle? If there is anything that you can share with us.
Yeah, for sure. So with Uranus also as well, a lot of times it corresponds to like trauma signatures.
Okay.
So when somebody has a trauma signature in their chart, or if somebody's experiencing trauma, it's going to affect their nervous system, you know, to where it could like even like shut down at times. So like, you know, when people like disassociate from things. So Uranus could correspond to things like that. Also, to even take a step back, the way that I look at the outer planets is the best thing, the best way that I would see for you to like make a gateway in between the two is to tune into the frequency that there are just octaves. So for
Okay.
Mercury, you have the lower octave of Uranus. And then for Mars, you have the, like, that's the lower octave of Pluto. And then for Neptune, Venus is the lower octave of Neptune. Right. So it's like you could even, in a sense, you could start there. And whenever you look at Neptune, as the, like, you can go back to Venus and maybe see if there's some like harmonious energy going on there. That's like, I would say like the higher octaves like seem to be like more like behind the scenes, like pulling the strings. Whereas like Mercury will manifest and you'll say like, oh, Mercury is doing this in the nervous system, this is how it's communicating. Whereas like Uranus will be actually controlling the electrical system, like as a more like a all-encompassing whole.
Okay.
And even like with even with Mars and Pluto, you got Mars and it's like controlling like the adrenal glands, and then Pluto will be more about like hormones. And when the adrenal glands go down, then hormones start messing up. So we'll say it's the adrenal, or like somebody will say it's the hormones and it's Pluto, but it also is going to like correspond to Mars and the adrenals. And then with Venus and Neptune, I have a very unique perspective on that, because Neptune to me is like, it is the all, which the only thing that I think of the all and the great flow of the body, I think of the lymphatic system.
Okay.
Like the lymphatic system is like, it is like so important. And I really feel like people don't understand it as much as we will soon to come to understand it, because it is about the flow. You know, if Neptune on some level is like this unconscious flow of source, then any obstruction to that could truly be the issue to any problem within the body.
Okay.
Which I wouldn't even consider disease, because I don't like using that word particularly.
No, I think it is a condition. So
Condition. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
It might not be a disease. Yeah. So let's kind of put the disease and condition part aside, and let's get back to natural well-being through like exercising and good diet. So, for example, Mars is the actual planet of energy, and Mars gives the natural athleticism in a human being. Like, let's say when Mars is placed in Cancer, or if Mars is placed in natural 12th house of Pisces, which is a land of fantasy. So there Mars kind of feels lazy, and people feel difficult, or people feel challenging in order to channelize their energy in the particular area that they actually need to. So how do you see? Do you think this is right? Would you agree with this statement?
Yeah, I do. And the first thing that comes to mind when you said that was, so if somebody has laziness due to like Mars being in Pisces, the first thing that I think, because Pisces corresponds to the feet, you know, the first thing, even like right now in this moment, like it's like you could get something like a roller ball or something like that, and just like maybe like envision this being like a very Martian energy, and putting it on your feet and just rubbing your feet on it literally would like create more vitality within the body.
Okay. Okay,
And
I think that's a very interesting tip.
right, because that's what I'm saying, like the layers just come in. You could find ways to, even when people say things are in detriment or depression or like fall and stuff like that, you can, think of the archetypes outside of yourself and think what would bring that in. It's like, would bring energy to your feet because Mars in Pisces and there's not a lot of energy in your feet. You can literally just like, you could take your feet and just like hit against it, and that's literally going to change the vibration of your whole well-being.
Yeah, I clearly understand, and I'm easily able to relate to it because when you showed that small thing, I think I have a similar mission to actually boost the blood flow in the feet. So I think that is basically boosting the blood flow and activating the blood flow to actually kind of generate energy in our feet. So I think that's what you're saying.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And a lot of times too, it's like we'll perceive things as blood flow. I'm going back to the whole Neptune thing I was talking about. It's more to me about the lymphatic fluid and how is that moving. Because 80%, like there's out of the fluids, like let's say you have lymphatic fluid and blood as fluid. The lymphatic fluid would be about 80%, and the blood would only be about 20%.
Okay.
So I look at things more as like, well, they go hand in hand for sure. And that's always something to keep in mind. Like, we're only taking all these things apart to recombine them. So we'll talk about lymph, we'll talk about liver, we'll talk about this and that. But knowing that they all have to come back together to make a holistic unity, that's the most important thing as well. But yeah, it's the lymph flow. Yeah.
Okay. So do you also work with the lunar phases of sun and like lunar phases of the moon and its relationship with the sun in terms of dealing with psychological and well-being astrology?
I do, but not so much though. Honestly, a lot of times when I do readings, they're like one-off readings, and I work more with my herbalism as far as, but like I do when it comes to like if somebody comes to me with like a cold or a flu or something like that, where it's something that's more acute. If they come in and it started like maybe like 5 days ago or something like that, I will look at the phases then. But other than that, I do not do that much, honestly.
Okay, so do you want to talk about sun and moon? Like sun is the vitality and moon is the factor of nourishment, and moon kind of defines the psychological well-being of a person. So do you want to talk about moon or sun going first?
You said moon or sun?
Yeah.
I personally like going to the moon first.
Good.
Yeah. 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 Even myself, like, well, I'm just getting into I was in evolutionary astrology to begin with, so I didn't work with moon like day or night charts. But okay. I have a night chart, which I realized, and it was like profound difference.
Yeah, moon is the sect ruler, so.
Say it again. Oh yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. So when it comes to the moon, in vitality, it's a lot of times people all like they think about exercising a lot, and when you think about exercising, it's like very Martian. It's very like go do this thing, But when it comes to like the moon, if you're ruled by the moon, it's more to me about like qigong or like flowing and like letting the essence, come in. It's about being receptive psychologically, and so like what is really nourishing. It's about feeling it. It's like when this person's talking to me, does this feel good? When I'm putting this food in my mouth, does this feel good? When I'm sitting in front of the food, how am I feeling about it? And also understanding that it's not about going into like excessive emotionalism with it as well. Like there's a balance and there's a difference between the two. And even allowing yourself to hold space for the spectrum of feeling that. It's like on one, you don't feel anything, so you just don't know how you're feeling. And then you just, you think there's an issue, but you just never took the time to feel it. And on the other side, you feel everything, and it's like you need to back away from the feeling to be able to like just be present and actually see what's occurring. So to me, that is the basis of the moon and well-being overall.
Okay, so and moon also rules the fluids in our body. So so any not bad, but still any affliction to moon kind of that particular native kind of becomes vulnerable to water contaminated or liquid based diseases or conditions, and it might actually cause some problems throughout the life. Even like I've seen some cases where people have common cold like 365 days in a year. So
Yeah.
these are it's not a disease, but it is a condition that kind of sticks with that particular person due to a particular placement of moon, like moon with a node, or moon with Mercury, especially because Mercury is an airy planet. So fluid with air kind of brings some kind of contamination and stuff. So how do you see that?
Right. Well, so I mean, the first thing I always go to with that is the diet, you know,
Yeah, that,
because yeah, it's to me, it's honestly about the diet, because even in an astrology chart, it's like a seed, you know. A seed can grow into so many different things depending on its environment, depending on, is something taking care of it, or is it the environment around it, just is it conducive for something that's healthy. So it's just, to me, I'm looking at it as just like a possibility, but also I look at it from the perspectives of what I was taught in Ayurveda about the doshas. So the dosha is like what imbalance you will go towards. So if you like all the energies in the chart, it's like these are showing where you would tend to have an imbalance if you do have an imbalance. So through the diet, that can be remedied in and of itself, from my perspective. Just understanding, like, going all the way back, understanding the actual human anatomy, and knowing that what is correct for the human species to eat. Which, I mean, on some level, it's mostly fruit, and because of our anatomy completely.
okay, great. So your perspective is that we can kind of straighten any temporary health dysfunction or some condition through diet itself, right?
Through diet and also the psychological processes, for sure.
Yeah,
because
and
because
yes.
the two will go together. Yeah, because the two will go together. So I just incorporate it with everybody. I'm like, how is your diet corresponding to how you're feeling in your thoughts, and
Oh,
like, how are those the same thing?
okay. So, and I think you said the word imbalance, and that is probably the best establishment of this entire topic itself, because each and every condition kind of arises in a human body only due to a particular imbalance of something. So, either it is in excess or it is short. So, this is the basic problem. Like. Balancing is the basic problem everywhere in the world, but still, when you talk about astrology and well-being, I think a particular dosage or overdosage of something leads to something. For example, carbohydrates, excess of carbohydrates kind of puts pancreas in trouble, and it turns into diabetic because of various conditions, that types of diabetes that it's given in diabetes. I'm not a science specialist, but still, I think diabetes occurs because of the pancreas's inability to convert carbohydrates into starch. So I think that is an excess of carbohydrates, and which causes a specific condition in the human body, and we have to deal with it probably for the rest of our lives once we get hold of it.
Right. So even with carbohydrates too, going on that specific case, you know, to me, and like I always invite people to tune into the frequency that carbohydrates are just complex sugars. So even some people believe that, like, if you eat too much fruit, you know, that becomes an issue for diabetes. But personally, I don't see it from that perspective for the most part, because I mean, unless somebody's born with something going on already, you know, it's more about, you know, the functioning of the body to begin with.
Okay.
But got my thought. Yeah, so simple sugars are not, you know, necessarily hard to digest. So somebody could have a predisposition for a pancreas problem, but if they're eating simple sugars from fruit, then they'll be just fine. But
Oh,
if you're eating carbohydrates, then your body has to take the carbohydrates apart, which creates acids. When you create acids in your body, it's breaking down tissue, you know, and over time that becomes corrosive. So a
okay.
lot of times with astrology and well-being, I have realized that it's like we have framed the astrology based off of a system of well-being that was not necessarily holistic to begin with. So for me, it's like it's about deconditioning like our actually the way we perceive well-being first, and then bringing it back to unify with the astrology.
Okay. So I think we kind of went through some of the basic and most important things related to well-being astrology, and we'll kind of get back with another episode or video on this sometime in future very soon. So, do you have any final thoughts on this?
Oh man, I have so even when you just said that, like I had like a Uranian flood of like electrical energy, and it kind of just stopped it like in a second. So no, I don't have any more questions or any final thoughts. I just really appreciate you, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I had a lot of learning through this from you, and I'm hoping to see you soon doing your own YouTube channel and stuff. And I really enjoyed the ES Zoom meeting that you did. And I'll put the link to that video, and people can surely check out that. And if you do readings, I'll also put your details in the description page. So thank you so much for coming over, and we'll meet next time for sure.
Yeah, appreciate you. Stay blessed. All right.
Thanks.